Well, welcome to this breakout session. We're starting only a little bit late. I'm Jennifer Baker. I'm going to be your moderator for this session. And we're looking at the Social Climate Fund and ensuring no one is left behind in the green transition. Now, if you may know, the Social Climate Fund is the first EU fund of its kind and scale and will provide financial support to vulnerable households, vulnerable transport users, vulnerable micro-enterprises, in fact, anyone that we might imagine vulnerable in the EU. And we will hopefully be able to discuss what it can do. Our overarching questions is how can we better implement the fund? What groups should we finance? We're going to talk about all of that. We should also talk a little bit about the impact it can have as well, because the fund will mobilise at least €86.7 billion over the 2026 to 2032 period. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the different member states' involvement and where the money goes. And I have a great team here to speak about that. So I'll call up to our stage one by one our excellent panellists. First, please welcome Ruth Pesselman, Director for Funds, Programming and Implementation from DG Employment, who we've heard a lot of this couple of days. Thank you very much, Ruth. A fellow colleague from the European Commission, this time from the Climate DG. Please welcome Beatrice Yordi, Director for Carbon Markets and Clean Mobility. Juliana Santos-Valgon is Director of the European Network Against Poverty, so brings a wealth of experience to the discussion. And last but by no means least, we have our token male on the panel. We have Pedro Almendagovia, Senior Policy Advisor from the Police Network. Please, Pedro. So we have a reasonable amount of time. We're going to have some Slido questions as before, and we will have an opportunity for dialogue with everyone here in the room. We have a microphone that will go around, and if you're shy and don't want to put your hand up, we'll have the opportunity for you to ask questions using the Slido platform. But we'll start with a round of introductions. You know, take 4 or 5 minutes each to set the scene, identify yourselves, give everyone a first sense of who you are and what your focus is. And we'll start at the far end, Ruth, with you, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. We've already had an introduction on the Social Climate Fund, which is a new fund. It doesn't actually exist yet. We're in the phases of preparing it. So the Social Climate Fund is basically created to address the social impacts emerging from the new emission trading systems, which will cover buildings and road transport. And the point is, okay, if ETS is introduced, prices of energy and transport will probably increase, and therefore some people will be very negatively affected. I mean, I have to say that the price signal is actually very important to make us more efficient in energy consumption, as we all found out after the invasion of Ukraine and the spike in energy prices, and we all suddenly became very good at turning down our heating and taking the bike. Of course, for some people, there is not, you know, for how much they can be energy efficient. It still remains, the prices can be prohibitive. And if we look at the situation in 2023, there were nearly 95 million people in the EU, roughly 21% of the population which are at risk of poverty, and there's also about 10% of the population which is recognized as being in some form of energy poverty, so that they cannot pay their energy bills, for example, so they cannot keep the house adequately warm, and so on. So these are numbers that show that there is already a sort of precarious situation which can be worsened with the introduction of ETS2, and it is why the Social Climate Fund has been created. So the Social Climate Fund is about supporting the most vulnerable groups that will be impacted by the increase of energy prices. Now we have to start implementing it. In this implementation, there are 3 points that I would like to mention. The first is the stakeholder engagement. Since it's a new thing that we're doing, it's very important to engage the stakeholders at all levels. I mean, national, regional, local, but also those that are more impacted, for example, the representatives of the cities or the representatives of people living in poverty and so on. So this is really important. With various instruments, it can be targeted consultation, it can be online, it can be workshops, but really to listen bottom up what is considered the most important is very important. The second point I want to mention is to really focus and identify the groups that really need the help of the Social Climate Fund. The fund itself, we already know, is not going to be able to eliminate the impact for everybody. You know, we already know that it's not enough. And therefore, it is really important that we identify the right groups that should benefit from it. And finally, although the fund also allows giving people direct income support, this is just a panacea. It just reduces the moment of reckoning. So the moment we have to really focus on structural measures that structurally change the equation, if you want, and so that people that live, for example, relatively poorer people tend to live in houses which are relatively less well isolated. So what we need to do is to invest in the isolation. Okay, for a couple of years you can perhaps give them some subsidy to help them, but eventually the key point is to arrive at a structural measure where even poor people live in houses which are well isolated. So these are the 3 points that I think we should focus on. And okay, I took the rest afterwards.
Well, you set the stage very beautifully for us because I think you've highlighted where it matters to people on the ground. Let me turn, Beatrice, to you. From the climate side of things, this is all aligned with the goals of the EU to reach sort of climate neutrality and zero carbon sort of emissions and all of these strategic things that are on the table. Yep. But give us your perspective on what you're working on.
Just many thanks. I'm very happy to be here because normally I'm in this climate fora or energy fora or industry fora, so very happy to be here. An impressive venue, impressive participation, so flattered to be here. Just to start, I mean, climate change affects most vulnerable citizens. They are affected more, floods or heat waves, water scarcity. So climate change affects more these vulnerable citizens. And this is one important statement. A second important statement, fossil fuel invoice is very painful for citizens, even more painful for vulnerable citizens, and very painful also for Europe, because we have, in this geopolitical situation, in these difficult times, we need to remind that we pay on average in the last years around 400 billion euro per year. This is the ticket for Europe, and clearly a very painful ticket for citizens. So when we were designing the Green Deal, I mean some years ago, it was clear that without a just transition, without a social climate fund, we will not make it. So here we are with the Social Climate Fund that sharing in the fascinating dossier with DG Employment and with you. So that's my encouragement, with you, because we are running to do this Social Climate Fund, meaning why running? Because the ETS2, the carbon pricing for building and transport, is going to start in 2027. And this carbon pricing, how it works, is that if you are consuming fossil fuels, these fossil fuels will pay for the externalities, will pay for the pollution, will pay for the emissions. And we need to put at the same time solutions for citizens, clearly for vulnerable ones. And this is why we have designed it. Just a last point, because we will, I don't want to take all the time, but very important that this Social Climate Fund was designed for vulnerable citizens. First, clear solidarity angle, but also solidarity between member states. So those member states with GDP lower, with less rich member states, they receive more money than a richer member state. So we work with average, and these two solidarity elements are very important. So we count on you to spread out the message that Social Climate Fund is here, that member states, they need to do their plans in the end of June this year, and that they need to contact you, and we will need to hear your voice here.
Thank you. Juliana, I'm sure you have plenty to build on from what you've already heard. Tell us why your organisation is specifically interested in this topic and what you're working on. We've heard the phrase energy poverty as something that's been in the headlines lately, but fill in flesh that out for us and put some more meat on the bones, please.
So just to start with, also thank you very much for the invitation. So EAPN is the European Anti-Poverty Network. We are a network of networks in more than 35 countries across Europe, and we are here to fight, address, and combat poverty and social exclusion. For us, it's very important to begin the conversation by addressing that poverty is multidimensional. We cannot tackle energy poverty if you don't tackle transport poverty, if you don't tackle material deprivation, if you don't tackle all the aspects that encompasses the life of people that are at risk of social exclusion. We are also facing difficult times, which are the results of poor housing conditions, pricing mechanism, the market design, per se, especially after the privatization of the energy market. For us, energy is a fundamental right. Access to energy should be a precondition for a life in dignity, and therefore we believe the access to energy should be recognized not only under the climate plans, but also under the European Pillar of Social Rights. It's of course our opinion that the Social Climate Fund is a key milestone, is a key instrument that addresses both structural and systemic problems, and can be really an inspiration for other policies. We hope that we indeed, like Ruth was saying, address the needs of the most vulnerable to be more energy efficient, but also to have access to clean and affordable energy. However, we regret that the amount allocated for the fund is not enough. We cannot forget that combined with that, there are also austerity measures happening right now. So how are we gonna align what the amount of the pocket of the money that is there with the cost of living, the increasing cost of living, austerity measures, austerity cuts? So for us, it requires really a deep reflection to not downsize the implementation of the Social Climate Fund. Another point of attention for us will be the balance between the Social Climate Fund with other funds, like the Cohesion Fund, the RRF, the Resilience and Facility Plan. So how this is going to be a solution for those who really need direct income to really survive these multiple crises and have adequate access to the social climate initiatives?
It's a good question. Money is not infinite, and it's something that we talk about a lot, especially as we push for European competitiveness. And then you ask, how do you also, at the same time, protect the most vulnerable? But that's something I think that the EU prides itself on doing at least a bit better than some of the rest of the world. But we'll hopefully have some smart thinking on it going forward with this fund. Pedro, your opening remarks, you've got to follow the three colleagues who've already said quite a lot, but tell us about your work.
Yeah, well, I think that the first thing that must be said is that the Social Climate Fund is a very important step in the right direction, and it is critical to enable another very important step in the right direction, which is the emissions trading system. I won't go into the details, but I would just like to highlight, first of all, a strong compliment to the Commission for a very, very important measure and for the very hard work that the people at the Commission, basically, namely at Klima and in Employ, are doing. You're doing a very important work. Everybody can always complain about something about the Commission, about the Union, etc. This is a great example of great work in the right direction. And we're very committed to supporting you as a network of cities and regions, and that's why I'm here. With pleasure. For those in the audience who are not very familiar with transport poverty is something that has deep and strong impacts in social, economic, and political life. If you remember the Gilets jaunes phenomenon in 2018, that was because of transport poverty, among other reasons. So it is very important that we act on it. And to act on transport poverty, we must mobilize social capital, not just European funds, social capital. And that's why it is critical that you participate in that effort and that we take transport poverty beyond the Social Climate Fund, that we keep it in the agenda, and that we take the action on transport poverty beyond the transport sector, the transport professionals, boring people like me, and that we make sure that you come in and drive this process forward. Transport poverty basically is, I'm waiting for you to shut me up when it's time, okay? I'm a man, I can only do one thing at a time. I cannot talk and look at the time, so being a token male. So, transport poverty basically happens, I'm simplifying, when people are put in a position that they have to spend either too much money or too much time to access their jobs and their basic services. So that could be because you're living in a low-density suburban area, underserved by public transport, and you take a lot of time to get into and out of the city when you commute. Or to simply take your kids to school and then go work in your job in another part of the suburban area. Because of the low density, you cannot have a highly functioning public transport. So you're faced with the option of either spending too much time waiting for public transport, or if you can barely afford it, you buy a car. And therefore, you come into a situation of forced car ownership, where you have to spend the time that you save is converted into a lot of money. It can eat up to 30% of the family income in the car. It can also be because you work night shifts. And when you come out or when you go in to clean the offices or to work in the factory, public transport in the night is not efficient. So again, you have to either spend a lot of time waiting for public transport or you have to spend a lot of money buying a car. Or it's because you have a disability and because there are several physical barriers in the public transport network. And so you either spend a lot of time waiting for public transport, going through incredible alternative paths, or you get a car or you pay for a taxi. So too much money or too much time. There are four, I'm going to be very quick, I promise. There are four critical things to understand about public transport poverty. Number one is that it is a structural phenomenon. It emerges from the fact that how the creation of large, low-density areas, the way we have shaped and managed our mobility systems. So the questions that we face is, with the Social Climate Fund, and moving forward is, are we going to give people an aspirin for the next 6 years, or are we going to implement structural solutions? The second characteristic, it is a regional problem. It is not about sporadic travel across the country. It's about everyday access to essential services. And so the question here is, are we going to have a top-down approach where we just sprinkle national subsidies, or are we going to have a bottom-up approach where we create these structural solutions where they are needed at the regional level? Third point is that this is about access, not about mobility. If I move your health center 30 kilometers away from your home, you're going to be moving more. So you're going to have more mobility, but you're going to have less accessibility. This is a question of accessibility. So there is a possibility, and I know this is very important for the third sector and many public services. You can either create ways to bring people to the services, or you can also invest this in bringing services to people. And finally, it's a matter of lack of choice. In theory, there is choice. Yes, in theory, you can walk to your job and it takes you 3 hours, apparently very healthy. The point is, that's not really an equivalent choice. And because of the way the mobility system currently works, there are very unequal choices. So there's not really freedom of choice. So the situation, if the problem is forced car ownership, the solution is not helping people buy cars. It's creating a multimodal mobility system, which includes cars, for example, as car sharing, as carpooling, where people have a choice and they can find the most efficient choice. Because if you don't have choice, you are forced to pick the least efficient choices. Car in a suburban area is the most convenient, but it's the one that spends more time and money. So we need to provide people with choice. And that's the way we should go. And that's it.
If you've sat in Brussels traffic, as I did this morning, you might not agree that it's the most convenient choice.
If you're sitting in traffic, you are traffic.
You are traffic,
Yeah.
that's true. I'm just pointing out that it's not always that convenient. So, you've heard sort of, if you like, 4 pitches for the different elements or different angles that we can take looking at the fund. But we're going to go to our first word cloud so that everyone in the room has a chance to put their thoughts up on the screen. So let's have a look at the Slido QR code, please. Can we get that up on the screen? I'm not sure if we can. It's coming. It's there, right. And so this is our first question to you. What are the main priorities to be addressed by the Social Climate Fund? Now, of course, you may say transport poverty, you may say other forms of poverty, you may say tackling climate, or you may say all of these things together. So we'll see what words you've got to put up there. I see only one participant typing at the moment. Housing. Well, I think that's clear because, as we know, housing contributes to a huge amount of emissions and our energy bills. Let's see, a few more people. 8 participants typing. Adaptation and mitigation. Price shock safety nets. I'm sure this is something we will talk about. The criminal justice sector. That's coming a little bit of left field. We'll see if we get to that or not. Access to services, filling basic life needs, energy poverty, something we've touched on already. Renovation of buildings, I suppose that falls under housing as well. Energy justice, vulnerabilities, ensuring that the vulnerable have transport. Again, you've made your case well, Pedro. Clean energy, accessibility. We're seeing all of these coming up on the big screen there. We will see higher accessibility, implementation in countries. Education, I think that's fair. Persons with disabilities, again, and disabilities I'm seeing a couple of times. And access to services. So looking at this, housing is coming up top because I think even we can put renovation of buildings into housing, although of course you may have renovation of workplaces as well, and access to the services. But I see energy and energy points and disabilities and opportunities coming around as well. It's only if you write exactly the same word that the word gets bigger. So a few things there that we could possibly group together. I'll turn now back to our panel, and we'll come back and maybe pick up on some of these word cloud points a little bit later on, and we will do another round as well. Ruth, so how can the Commission support the member states with the preparation of social climate plans so that they're all sort of working together? We know how this comes when some great ideas at EU level and then it filters down and doesn't always operate in the same level from state to state. We want to get these plans submitted and we want adoption then coming from that. How do we do that?
So, yes, we are now for everyone to understand, we are now at the stage where member states should submit national plans by June 2025, and the Commission should then adopt them, and then so that they, let's say, become operational beginning 26, although they would be actually retroactive. I mean, initiatives which have already taken place, some initiatives have already been taken place, can also be part of the plan. Since it's new, we are, so this is actually why DG Employment has become much more involved, because we are sort of used in negotiating with the member states with the Social Climate Fund. And so we have this joint partnership, we're working together with DG Klima. What we've been doing now is, I would say, first thing is that we have produced structured guidance. There are 2 guidance documents that came out yesterday. One is on how to implement the do not significant harm, and one is a guide for member states on how to do the plans, which includes really everything. I mean, what kind of measures and investment they can cover, how they should involve stakeholders, how they should identify the target groups, which way to sort of submit these plans to us, explanation how we will assess it, which criteria we will take. It's very long and complicated. It's not so complicated, but it's long because it really tries to give guidance on all the different aspects to the member states so that they can so that we all have a shared understanding on how this is going on. In the meantime, we also had some member states, 10 member states, use the technical support instrument to prepare themselves on using on how they would want to do the Social Climate Fund. Then now we are starting the discussion with the, the discussion with the member states started on the initiative of DG Klima already from when the fund was adopted. There was an expert group, there is an expert group, and where they start the discussion. And then we have also started the discussion with the sort of stakeholders like those present here, but also, I don't know, represented the Committee of the Regions and, you know, other possible stakeholders. But most important now, I mean, since January, I would say we have started the bilateral discussions with the member states, because the guidance that was adopted yesterday, the member states had the previous drafts, not the final version, but they had already. So we could already start discussing with them bilaterally what they see most important, what is, you know, how they see their priorities, how to engage regional authorities. I mean, the more the country is regionalized, the more it is important. I mean, you know, for some small countries, it's not necessarily necessary, but you know, big countries which have the problems in the different regions are different. And we can expect, so the programs can finance, I mean, just to go back, they can finance measures, what do we mean by measures is in the guidance, investments, what do we mean by investment, that's also in the guidance, and as I said before, this direct income support, which is, however, the residual. I mean, as I said before, we don't think this is, you know, this is not a measure which is sustainable in the long run, and therefore it should be limited and regressive through time, otherwise, because the whole idea is to have a structural change. And on housing, if I may I? Because actually I think it's, of course, people perhaps they write housing and they mean renovation of buildings. Renovation of buildings and making housing more efficient is one of the key aspects that will be covered by the Social Climate Fund. But ideally, the issue of housing can also be new builds. It can also be new builds thought with an idea that you have public transport reaching them. So exactly not the suburban, but for example, revitalizing inner city areas, which have lots of empty offices at the moment. And, you know, they could be transformed into energy efficient buildings, which are in the city. You have public transport. So the creation of new builds, having in mind public transport, I think is also very important, although not necessarily to be financed by the Social Climate Fund.
And making those affordable housing as well for those who are at the bottom tier. And I have here the notes, the SCPs or the social climate plans must be submitted to the European Commission by the Member States by the 30th of June 2025. So they still have a little bit of time, but as you say, there's support there for them. Beatrice, let me ask you, if you had to choose 2 or 3, if you like, flagship measures for funding, what would it be and why?
Thanks for the question. Just before I come with my preferred ones, let me say that number one, I fully agree with Juliana. This is not enough money. So Social Climate Fund is fantastic. I'm very proud of having been in the conception, in the negotiation, and now in the implementation. But it's not enough money, we know that. But let me, apart from the European funds, 2 other pots that are important that you are aware. One is the revenues from ETS2, and Pedro, you made my day. In these days that everybody bashes Europe and the Commission, it's fantastic to hear this. Thanks for that, really. But one pot that is very important is that the ETS2, so the carbon pricing in building and transport, we estimate that while we have 87 billion for the Social Climate Fund, at the same time we can have 270 billion in the pocket of member states to do investments on renovation, transport in a transversal way with accessibility. So there are this carbon pricing is raising money that goes part clearly obligatory to solidarity and other to member states, and member states can top up the Social Climate Fund. So that's important. And the second point that I also hammer wherever I go is the fossil fuel subsidies. We are still in a world that is paying for fossil fuels. This country has been, until yesterday, paying the corporate fleets favorite taxation for combustion cars. There is no sense, or motorways are free. just to put Belgium, but I can put more 26 examples. Just also one thing is the regional problem, and in how we allocated the money for Social Climate Fund, one of the parameters is the rural population, because I'm absolutely aware, and I come with one of my favorite, that is transport on demand. You have, this is happening in some regions, Castilla-Leon region is one of them, and you can have platforms, and instead of the buses in a kind of rigid way going 3 times per day, they are à la demande. So you can, or through an IT, or by telephone, because all people are not so good in ITs, that you just book and you move the trajectory and the timing depending on the demand. So this transport à la demande, and biking, to be honest, is like obvious, but it's not obvious. The right to bike in a secure environment, believe me, that we are lacking that all over Europe, all over Europe. So this shared mobility, transport à la demande, so demand transport, this is, and we can have, of course, platforms, but this is very good, very cheap, if I could say, but it considers the integral part. Then the social climate leasing, the social leasing of electrical vehicles. We saw in France that it had a big success. France is preparing, and yesterday that it was also a very active days. We have the guidelines adopted, but also the automotive plan, that it refers to 2 things important for you to know. One is the example of the social electrical vehicles. So you pay €100 per month and you have access to electrical vehicle. And also the transport poverty that is under preparation in the Commission that our colleagues in DG Move lead. Another very good example is the refurbishment of building done, and it can be done in offices, and it can be done in factories, and it can be done with pre-manufacturing elements like we have in Estonia or countries. So all over Europe we have fantastic, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but I think that this transversal approach surrounded by measures, because it doesn't have a lot of sense that we inject money on a measure when the ecosystem is not favoring the refurbishment of the buildings, the heat pumps, and we need to consider electricity prices, that they are too high, and we need to put privileged tariffs for heat pumps, refurbishment of buildings, and clearly a transversal approach to transport.
I'm going to add another layer of complexity to your appeal for safe cycling, but also for pollution-free cycling if you're in cities, because that's another big concern for those road users of that type. Juliana, what sort of interventions do you see that would be tailored to make sure that they reach those most in need? Because there's a swathe of middle ground here, but there's also those who are at the most vulnerable, who are already suffering from questions of poor health, of ghettoization, they are time poor. Are there strategic interventions that we could put in place?
Yes. First of all, I would like to go off topic a little bit and just remind that as the APN, we are not fighting for the alleviation of poverty, we are fighting for the eradication of poverty. We don't want people to be less poor. We don't want poor people at all. So from that perspective is that what we stress a lot, that energy is a fundamental right and should be considered as an essential service. So just to reframe that. When it comes also, and another point of attention will be to probably find a good balance between short-term measures and long-term measures. Because people who are hungry, they are hungry today. And people, they have to choose between paying their electricity bill and food on the table. So direct measures that provide direct income support are needed together with renovation plans. So this is also a very important point. And also know how it can be more consistent and cohesive. Let's not forget that we have, again, naming the European Pillar of Social Rights, the principle on the minimum income. We can have a minimum income as an additional safety net to the Social Climate Fund to support the most vulnerable households. Of course, renovation also, the renovation wave also would need to really focus on target measures for housings with the lowest income, and there are particular groups like people living on the social housing sector that also require a specific need and a specific attention, and low-income households in private rental sector. So these are very important as well. I already mentioned also the better coordination between all the structural funds, but I would like to come to a point that was mentioned on the slide, which was the criminal justice sector when it comes to all of that. I think we already need to understand the stigma behind poverty and how difficult it will be that people will dare to even ask for help and support. The stigmatization that comes with it, the discrimination that many people face in the social service sector, it's what really also leave people not willing to access this kind of rights. Therefore, we also believe that tailor-made programs with a lot of information, communication, easy, user-friendly publications or leaflets should be also be part at the national action plans.
Well, you've raised a lot there, and in fact, you even mentioned something that I didn't have on my list to consider, which was, of course, food, access to food. There are food deserts even in Europe's wealthy countries, which is a scandal, really. But I guess also tied a little bit to questions around climate and questions around transport. Pedro, when we're talking about, I mean, it's sort of alluding to the different regions, but how can regional and local authorities contribute to shaping measures? Because we're talking a little bit at member state plan level, but what sort of measures and investments could be considered at that different level?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, we must understand that local and regional governments have a lot of competencies and capabilities, even some of them beyond their strict legal jurisdiction. And they can do a lot. I mean, yes, they can handle public, national public subsidy programs, et cetera, but through their powers and their skills, they are doing a lot of public procurement. They are doing a lot of employment. They support employment programs. They work a lot with businesses. They can help mobilize public, but also private investments. They are regulators. They are connectors. So they can play a key role, first of all, in mobilizing social capital, working with the third sector, working with local businesses, and creating and thinking out of the box, because the problem is the box. So we need to think out of the box together at the local and regional level and come up with ideas that can make mobility more efficient, therefore more fair, to eradicate, I fully agree, transport poverty. If it's a structural issue, we can eradicate it. That's one point. The other one is that, of course, local and regional authorities, they can foster emergence of choice. You know, they are leading with public transport networks. They can fund shared mobility services. They can even facilitate the emergence of shared mobility services. If you've been around urban centers in Europe, you see the e-scooters or the shared bikes or the car sharing, etc., and you usually see it in the urban centers, because that's where it's easier for these businesses to make money. So to help them also serve these lower density areas, suburban areas, peri-urban areas, even rural areas, we have to support them to establish a viable business there. And it's critical that we do it, because it is impossible for the public sector to pay for and manage and do everything to launch car sharing, carpooling, or demand responsive transport at the scale at which we need them. So this public-private partnership is essential, wherever you place yourself in the ideological scale. And so, finally, we also have to understand that there is a difference, there's a fundamental strategic difference, if you like, between housing, energy poverty and transport poverty. Because energy poverty, so to put it very simply, that you have to spend more money heating or refrigerating with the electricity in your home, it is about investing in an individual asset. We have to help people make their houses more energy efficient. It's about investing in an individual asset. There are no systemic effects. That's it. Whereas with transport poverty, the big problem is that people have been spending all their money on their individual asset. And that has created systemic problems. So we need to invest in the mobility system, not necessarily in people's cars, individual cars, but to help emerge a mobility system that provides systemic benefits. That can include, to be clear, that can include helping people buy an electric car, as long as it is important that that investment leads not only to benefits for the household, but also for their community. For example, carpooling, car sharing. There are several possibilities today, and just to finish, I think that many of us are not aware. As a 51-year-old man, I still struggle sometimes to find out the huge possibilities that digital platforms provide today for the provision of these kinds of services, helping demand match the offer. And so carpooling today is certainly not what it was 20 years ago. And that's why, for example, to cite an example, the region of Île-de-France, which, as you may know, is the region of the city of Paris, 72% of this region is rural. And they are massively investing in a carpooling scheme because it's faster, it's cheaper, and for those who own a car, it can even be help them because you can get paid to give rides to your neighbors. So it's finding these solutions where everybody wins, basically.
Well, these are good solutions. We'll turn, however, to the challenges, and we'll circle back around before the end of the panel to hopefully finish on a somewhat more positive note. But once again, I'm going to ask the room to get your phones out and get on Slido. Our next question is, what are the biggest challenges for the Social Climate Fund? And if we can launch that, I'm trying to see if I can do it on my device. We have that there. Great. So vote for what you think the biggest challenges might be. We've heard a lot of the desires, the aspirations, a little bit trickier to time. Oh, I know someone's going to say time and money. Yeah, obviously, always. Fund availability, implementation, absolutely. I see a few more people. Misuse of the money, again, obviously this issue. Red tape, Ruth, I was going to ask you a little bit about that. Fund availability, again, allocation as also adequate funding. I'm tying all of these things together under the umbrella of funds and money. Finding people that truly need it and getting them to apply, but I think it's more that the member states need to do that. Lack of digital skills. Someone was paying attention yesterday, I think, on the plenary. Fair distribution of funds, audit governance. I think that's absolutely ensuring that these funds that come up do go to the right places. The capitalist system, I mean, I don't think there's enough time in our panel to tackle that one. Acceptance, I suppose, maybe when we're talking about things like carpooling, that does require acceptance and people being prepared to share their car space. Regional differences, again, we've touched on that. Austerity, Juliana, you brought that up. Reaching out to sole and micro entrepreneurs, general mindset. So I think that I could put under the umbrella, if you like, of getting societal buy-in, if you like. So governance, time, regional differences, targeting, acceptance, fair distribution and audit I'm putting together, and the capitalist system. Oh my goodness, everyone wants to talk about the capitalist system. Okay. Well, let's move away from Slido for a minute and use a far less high-tech method. Put your hands up if you put capitalist system up there, please. Let's see how many in the room put that. Come on, hands up where we can see you. Okay, and how many people put time? Okay. We have a microphone in the room. Anyone want to elaborate on why they put whatever they put up there as a word? I see one hand here. tell us why you chose your particular challenge, and then we'll see if the panelists want to react to your suggestions or your thoughts.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
We can.
My name is Clotilde Clark-Fulke. I work for Eurodiaconia, which is a network of social and healthcare service providers. I've put time, because the solution you propose are very long-term when you speak about, developing mobility and carpooling. ETS2 is coming very soon, and I am concerned we are not taking the measure of the impact it will have. Social impact, but therefore political impact as well. We are in Brussels, election after election, we are so concerned by the rise of extreme parties, as if it was completely disconnected from the decisions that are being taken here. So I think you have my question here. Social Climate Fund is great, but it's such a small tool compared to the challenge coming up with ETS2. Is there any way ETS2 could be further delayed? And what is your take on the lack of adequation between the time frame we need and the Social Climate Fund and ETS2? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to tackle this? Yeah, okay, Beatrice.
Yeah, many thanks for the question. Just to say that we know that every time that we talk about the prices at the pump or the gas prices, it gets clearly has an impact in people, but there is the impact that has in middle class, or the how extreme parties use in a populistic way this issue. It's really worrying. And let me just explain. I mean, it seems that we are comfortable in a situation with 400 billion inputs of fossil fuels. It seems that we are comfortable in a situation that this week in Brussels we enjoy the sunshine, but in a scale of out of 10, we were in number 10 on pollution and the worst quality of air. And it seems that we are comfortable in 300,000 premature deaths per year. So I think that it is very important that we say the dependence on Russia, we know what it is, but the dependence on fossil fuels from other countries is not beautiful, believe me. So I think that there's a social, and a collective effort that we need to say, okay, shall we go to modern solutions? I mean, why, if I don't have the right to plug or to receive a proper tariff with my solar energy installed in my house, shouldn't we fight for that, for citizen rights on being prosumers, as we call them, so consumers and generators, to have different choices for transport? That is my choice, or car sharing. So I think that the idea of delay the ETS2, which is, we know that transport and building are the big part of the pollution and are the big part of fossil fuel consumption. I don't think it is to hide, if I could say. And just to be very clear, the carbon pricing comes with enormous opportunities. So it will be funds for you to renovate your house. We are talking about the Social Climate Fund, but I insist, 270 billion estimation that there will be until 2032 for opportunities to or share mobility, or heat pump, or solar energy in your house, or refurbishment your building. I think just to hide and go on as if we didn't have this problem in transport and building, in my opinion, is not the solution.
Pedro, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. I think it's a very fair question. I would say, number one, as many things in life, this poses an incredible dilemma. But we must be very aware of the dilemma, which is, for example, just to cite an example. So you see in many of our members, city members, you see the mayors from the urban centers. They want to advance speed limit reductions. They want to advance air quality access restrictions, because the people who live in the urban centers, they have the right to live. And we know, for example, that air quality problems disproportionately affect people, households with lower incomes. They are the most vulnerable. And the same goes for road safety. So it's not just, well, do we raise the prices for people who live in the suburbs? It's also, well, do we help people who live in the center and who are disproportionately affected by the problems generated by the use and abuse of motorized traffic? So, I mean, it's a dilemma. That's why leadership is necessary. I mean, for obvious things, you don't need leadership, but we need. And the point on leadership, I think, is also very important because we have to understand that, you know, local and regional governments, they are, well, integrated in member states. But geographical integration, so to speak, does not imply hierarchical subordination. Local and regional governments have their own political legitimacy. They're elected. They have to respond to their voters. And so many of them, we must integrate them in this process because otherwise we are asking them from the national level, you know, you go ahead, step in front of the bull, take the responsibility for these tough measures, and then, well, it's your problem. And we must include them so that it's a collective decision, not only that includes different levels of political officials. And that's why it's critical that local and regional governments are thoroughly consulted and actively involved in the implementation of this fund. And just the final sentence is that we don't have time, you're very right, 6 years is very short, we don't have time to, you know, launch into great infrastructural or to change land use and stuff like that. But solutions like shared mobility can be quickly implemented and upscaled using the existing infrastructure, the existing vehicles. And the same goes for example, bikes. If you would reduce the speed limit in suburban roads, you could have people safely cycling on them without even putting bike lanes. So it can be done very fast.
Well, you touched on a few things that came up in the word cloud, because I'm looking here, it says at least one person put a lack of political will, which I think is obviously a concern, and also incidental bias or stereotypes and habits, which I think probably tie together. Have we more questions in the room? Yes, and I see 2 hands go up straight away. You can tie it to your word cloud answer, or it can be completely new.
Yes, hello, my name is Dagmar. I'm from the ESF in Austria. And thank you for the panel and the very interesting points you're raising. I'm just wondering, it feels a bit like a discussion from the old times, because let's be honest, nobody's talking about the Green Deal anymore. And I just wonder how you feel about it, whether this is a challenge you are having in your daily work with implementing the Social Climate Fund, because nowadays everyone is talking about the Clean Deal, about competitiveness, about like defense, and it feels a bit as if the climate change is not perceived as a big challenge anymore, although of course it is. And yeah, that's why I'm wondering whether you can feel this change in the mood in your work as well.
Absolutely, and I see someone had put on the word cloud as well, a lack of focus because of war, but that could be lack of focus because of the many, many things in this world that are taking our attention away from the climate crisis. Who would like to answer that? Ruth, do you want to at least respond?
Yes, okay, I take it, and I will take the opportunity also to say a few other things. Yes, obviously, it is not in the top of the political discussion at the moment. I mean, we're not going to hide ourselves on that. At the same time, we're talking about structural change in a way, you know? You can't each time change on the basis of policy. I mean, you work on the social fund. I mean, you know that, you know, programming is like 7 years, you know? So the key point is that this is something that is going to happen. It is, like, I don't need to repeat everything that Beatrice said. We want to fight climate change. It's a long-term project, and Social Climate Fund has now been agreed. It will be implemented. Maybe it will not make the headlines anymore, but it's still going to be in the, you know, underneath. We will implement it and make sure that the measures are structural and have a long-term effect. I just want to take the opportunity to come back to one of the points that Juliana made about the link with the other funds, because this is one of the things that we are putting a lot of attention to. We're talking about the other European funds. I'm talking about the Social Fund, Regional Fund, Just Transition Fund, RRF. All of these funds may be already financing measures of the type that may be financed by the Social Climate Fund. So it is absolutely essential that we have a good coordination. First, that we don't pay the same thing twice, obviously. This European auditors reflex. But second, also to have the good practices. I mean, for example, the examples that Beatrice mentioned, there may be other good examples around that, that could be scaled up. There may be some operations which are supported, but they're supported across the board, and the Social Climate Fund could give an extra amount to focus for the most vulnerable, for example. So there are synergies that can be put between the different funds. So this is actually something on which we're asking member states to put a lot of attention to. And just to build also on the point that was just made on the role of regional local authorities, indeed, I believe they should not just be, first of all, it does depend a bit on the country, but I don't think they should just be consulted. They should be part of the designing the programs, and then, of course, also the implementation afterwards, because, you know, it's not a done deal, huh? And everyone is good at writing a good program, and then you actually have to implement it. And, yeah. Last but not least, to come back on the point on the minimum income, I mean, the minimum income is not something that is covered by the Social Climate Fund. The minimum income exists in most countries, and it is about really the basic safety net for the people that cannot really afford to put food on the table, like you said, and that will continue to exist as it is. And indeed, member states could perhaps consider, you know, increasing it, or that it takes more into consideration the cost of poverty, of energy, and things like that. I mean, these are aspects, but they. Things that, I mean, I may agree with what you're saying, but they exude, you know, they're not part of the Social Climate Fund and the implementation of the Social Climate Fund. Voilà.
Juliana, and then Beatrice.
Yeah, I will try to be very short. I think, and I do agree with Ruth, and we know that the minimum income schemes are not part of the Social Climate Fund, but we're talking about consistency and we're talking about coherence. So it's also important, if you want to achieve the systemic change that we want to see, we need to avoid to work in silos. One fund here, one fund there, one program here, one program there. And probably there is also why it feels that there is a lack of priority on climate right now. For us, what it's really a point of attention and monitoring is the uncertainty around the national action plans on climate and energy. If I'm not wrong, only one country, if I'm not wrong, has already developed or is trying to mainstream it in a more consistent way. And I also like to share with you that I agree with Pedro that coordination with local, regional authorities should be the transversal principle of the Social Climate Fund. Participation with the authorities, like Ruth said, but what about the participation of the beneficiaries? So I think as well we need to create space to hear those who are really being affected by that on how it's working or not working. And that's it.
Thank you. I mean, social sort of input is obviously something we talk a lot about when we talk about this sort of civil society involvement. Beatrice, you had a comment.
Just, I mean, a very good question, and allow me to clarify, because yesterday, and it's part of also my portfolio, yesterday the college adopted the automotive action plan. And in the press, it was like, okay, we are abandoning the Green Deal. The only change that we have proposed, and this is still to be changed adopted by Council and Parliament, is that the target of 2025 stays, but instead of same target 25, 26, and 27, the automotive manufacturers can have, if they have lower this year, they need to catch up in the other years. So it is the average. The average that I insist it was the same targets. So it is true, we included our flexibility, and it is true that in half of the press, not all the press, it was read as Green Deal is over. So I think that it's very important to pass, for me, two messages. Green Deal stays. We are staying the course, very important. true that I think that the climate change, and you know probably well the terrible floods in Slovenia or in Greece or in Spain or that I come from, I mean, all over Europe, it can reach even 16% of GDP in Slovenia, 16% of GDP. And when the Bank of England is super worried for climate change, or when insurance are super worried of climate change, it's not only the NGOs, and with a full respect for NGOs. So climate change is there. In the political agenda, the Green Deal is there. What it is true is that the competitiveness, the growth, the security of supply due to a war in the doors of Europe is there. So I think that we will need to accompany the climate change together with this other, call it enabling condition, call it your first objective, but it doesn't mean that we are stepping back and going backwards in the Green Deal.
Beatrice, I long for the day when something makes everybody happy, because it's just not going to be. It's a difficult job that we know you have, and you know, we know there is lobbying from all sides here in Brussels. We're very familiar with that, so good luck is what I would say, to have a day where the press is unanimously happy. Pedro, you were going to say something.
I'd like to say to the Austrian colleague, I share your concerns, of course. I think we all do. I find myself every morning waking up, checking the news to see what they do now. And I think that blackmail, open blackmail, is back on the as a diplomatic tool. So yes, we wonder for our security. But as we look at the geopolitical evolution and what it may bring or not, and we don't know, I think that it's obviously critical that we remind ourselves that we will inevitably have more extreme and more frequent extreme climate events, more intense and more frequent. That is now inevitable. That these events will have a direct impact on physical infrastructure, transport infrastructure, on factories, on businesses, on agricultural, on food production, etc. That these impacts will have social impacts, social implications, economic implications, and inevitably political implications. And the time to prepare to deal with that, well, it should have started, but well, if not yesterday, then work on it today. And back to the Social Climate Fund, I think this is an essential tool, not to solve all the problems, but to trigger the right approach. And I would say that this, I think, is, as for us as a network of local and regional authorities, that is our biggest concern, is that the push is done in the right direction. That is our critical concern, that it triggers actions in the right direction, that it doesn't persist in things that, picking up the word, just interest to the current capitalist system, you know, squeezing every drop from the current situation instead of evolving. And regarding lack of political will, which was also on the cloud, I think that it's important to understand, all of us, that political will is a resource that we create and we foster and sustain. And as a public servant myself, having worked for 21 years at the local level in the city of Lisbon, I know, and I'm sure many of you in the room know as well, political will is not something that just appears out of magic. We cannot wait for the next deputy mayor. I certainly didn't. We have to create political will and then try to influence the elected officials. And I think that's a big challenge for all of us professionals these days. And how can we get things on track, on this track that we as experts know is the necessary track? That's the big problem.
And that's also as well where social buy-in and civil society can help press the lever. I think I saw another hand up towards the front here. Did somebody have a question? No? Anybody else got a question or a comment they wanted to make? Okay, well, I will remind you that you can also do so on Slido. I see there's one question that's come in, at least from Slido. What do you think would be the biggest challenge for the Commission in helping the member states efficiently implement the SCF? Who would like to tackle that? Ruth, I'm glancing in your direction, but if any of the others want to hazard a guess at what might be a big challenge, I'm welcome to hear it.
I mean, I said already before, I think the biggest challenge is the targeting of the vulnerable groups. I would also add another point, which is our challenge, which is the issue of simplification. I take the point that Juliana made. If you want to really reach the hardest group, you need to make things simple for them, and we are not very good at making things simple. So, so that's, I think, is also for us an important challenge. But now, of course, also time is short. I mean, so we are really now fully engaged, my teams and the Beatrice teams, on the discussing bilateral with the member states, taking into account all these things that we are mentioning here. So the lack of time, the need of important targeting, the need to involving the bottom-up regions and local authorities, the different dimension. I mean, the aspect of city versus rural, which is not the typical aspect way that regions, I mean, you know, we usually talk to regions and we're not really looking at the difference urban, rural, while here it's very important in this specific, I mean, for the Social Climate Fund, the interaction between the funds, as I mentioned before. And then also the issue of implementation, because it is true that time is short, but it's also true that this is something new, so some things will come up that we can't think about now. So,
I'm looking back again at the word cloud here, and I see one of the other largish responses was audit or misuse of money. And I know we're leaping ahead a little bit, but how do we measure effectiveness of these sorts of funds? We have experience in other areas. What, if you like, should be the KPIs, and what about the level of responsibility when it comes to distributing public funds and ensuring that, again, funds going to middle rather than low-income households? So I think there's concerns that I'm seeing more broadly about, is this going to be implemented properly, and what are the checks and balances? Pedro?
Yeah, I think there's a very simple KPI. And which is when the ETS2 comes into effect in the end of 2027, are people going to go nuts or not? Are they going to go to the streets, break stuff, or will this be accepted? And that's the big challenge for the Social Climate Fund. Everything else is secondary. When we get there, are we going to be ready for a hike in fossil fuel prices? And that's what every member state, every professional should be asking him or herself as we consider any measure that is being proposed to deal with the Social Climate Fund. Will this prevent chaos and revolt from happening? It's very simple.
I take it you're thinking of something like the Gilets jaunes and that
Yeah.
sort of extreme reaction that we've seen before. Juliana, do you have any thoughts on how we, if you like, not balance the books, but keep the checks and balances in place in terms of auditing even effectiveness?
I believe that, although I already mentioned this is a key milestone, it's really one of the most important instruments tackling structural and systemic inequalities. Probably our concern in terms of check and balance is really to keep the social on the fund. That we don't, it's not only a climate fund, it's a social climate fund, and we do not forget to, like Ruth said, the challenge is going to be how to target the household, so that we do not forget that the fund is also social.
So, Beatrice and then Ruth.
No, well, just very short. I like Pedro's simple indicator, because we are something that we have and is related to the hostile, sometimes a narrative about Europe is that on many occasions people are not aware that the possibility of refurbishment of the house or access to public transport, it has been paid by whom? And then I think it's very important that we say that, okay, this is a polluter pays principle injected in a climate and social measure. And this is, it is in the regulation that they need to put it there, but of course it is super important that working with cities, working with local actors and working with regions, that this message is passed, because Europe is so many times used in the bad things and never ever used. For example, the RRF, I mean, that Europe has asked for a lending money to inject it due to COVID crisis. And not many people are aware that all this support it's coming from where? I mean, it's coming from which solidarity or which fund? Who has paid that? And so I think that the narrative that we convert this ETS2 in a positive narrative is fundamental, not only for the acceptance of climate policies, but also for the acceptance of European and social policies.
I won't open the can of worms at this point, but certainly with polluter pays principles, you need safeguards. That's not just always passed on to the customer or the consumer at the end of the day as well. Ruth, you had a comment.
I'm going to be the nasty audit person here. So I agree with the KPI that Pedro mentioned, but in practice, the auditors are going to check the audit trail, and even if there is no, it is successful in your terms, it's not necessarily successful from the auditor point of view. So, okay, here is the usual, it's important to say that the Social Climate Fund will be financed like the RRF, so it is based on milestones and targets. I mean, reimbursement by the by the Commission will be on the basis of attainment of milestones and targets and not on the basis of the real cost. So now, what we will have to do is a careful assessing ex ante of the costing of the various measures. So basically there is an agreement ex ante of how much the Commission will give for the various measures, based as much as possible on historical costs, so that we don't invent things out of the blue. And then on the basis of these agreements, then the Commission will pay on the achievement of the targets. Important is that there is, from the beginning, let's say, a system of mutual trust, including the national auditors, on that, on how these initial costs have been set in place, so that then, when the Commission when there is the verification of the assessment of the on the achievement, of the milestones and targets, then the Commission can pay, and there is overall, everyone has agreed that the system is fair, and we're not misusing the funds or paying twice, as I said before, for things which are already financed by another fund, for example, and also that the final beneficiaries can be traced, so it is known who are the final people that actually get the money or the support, and hopefully the auditors will be happy.
Hopefully, yes. Any final questions in the room? I'm just checking whether we had any new ones on Slido. No, just the one so far. Anyone? Yes, a hand at the back.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Martina Corti and I work for Solidar, which is a network of progressive civil society organizations that work to advance social justice and the just transition. And we've spoken about how, like, the integration with the other structural funds and the involvement of stakeholders, and we've referenced a couple of times to the RRF. And I was wondering if for what concerns the involvement of stakeholders for the Social Climate Fund, you think the Commission has a bit learned from the practice of RRF, because there have been studies, for instance, from the European Economic and Social Committee, but also we have direct experience from our members at national level about the strong limitations when it comes to involving civil society organizations, that the member states have not done that to a satisfactory level. So I was wondering if in the guidelines that you've produced, you've included more guarantees for civil society organization of being more meaningfully involved, because I think if we go back to what Juliana was saying about the importance of connecting with the beneficiaries, civil society organizations are key there. So I was curious about that. Thank you.
Quite a long question, but I think we might have quite a quick answer.
Yes. No, I think clearly we have learned, I admit the Commission has learned from the experience of the RRF, and therefore we are now, member states are asked to consult, as I said, I think I said it in my initial intervention, both the different levels, the regional and the local level of the government, but also the stakeholders. And the Commission will assess this in the, when we look at the plans to ensure there has been a wide consultation. And as I said also, I don't think it's not just about consulting. There is a part of I mean, not just ticking the box, yeah? You also have to see how the things that have been emerging from the consultations are then put into place, and the Commission will be assessing this. It's written in the guidance.
If I may add very briefly, it was a clear request from the European Parliament in the co-decision.
And just another quick question that Emma Guizard has put in, that did any member states submit their national plans yet, and would implementation of the SCF be delayed if they don't meet the June deadline?
No
First
delay.
part.
We have informal contacts and informal drafts, but not draft singular, but not yet. But actually, we are relatively confident. Maybe they will not all submit by June 2020, but well, during the course of the year, we're also confident that the more we have informal discussions now, bilateral discussions and negotiations, and the more what we get is a final product that can be adopted quickly.
Pedro, you wanted to add something?
As a network of cities and regions, we have a very negative impression of the RRF, so you're not alone. And we are particularly worried about the replication of this financing model into other European funding instruments. Giving loads of money to spend in little time seems to us like a sure recipe for disaster. It's certainly not neither Ruth's nor Beatrice's, so it's not a criticism. We know national governments love it. I wonder why, but we have a very negative impression about it. It is a problem that it's being replicated. We must understand that national governments and local and regional governments, they have different jurisdictions and different political accountabilities. Therefore, inevitably, they will have different political agendas and different political priorities. It is natural. The point is, and this is a problem for European governance, is that obviously it is only member states representing the national interests when these instruments are discussed. And that is a problem, because the interests and the priorities and the needs and the understanding of local and regional authorities, which are a legitimate level of European governance, they are not being properly represented when time comes to make a decision. In what regards the Social Climate Fund, there is consultation. We hope that at that point, I would just want to say two points. We certainly expect the Commission to be demanding in what respects proper consultation procedures, because the member states will have to show that they consulted properly. And as a network of cities and regions, I would like to tell all of you that Polis is more than willing. We are happy to cooperate with any of you, supporting you in the consultations that your respective member states will undertake. We have done so with some of our members already. Also, we are more than happy to cooperate with your network to really take the consultation opportunity as a real opportunity to shape things in the right direction.
Well, I know we have got lunch in just a few minutes, but I see two questions that we might be able to tackle quickly, and that we've already touched on as well. So, there will be an EU affordable housing plan. How will this initiative be linked to the Social Climate Fund? And the other question, a little bit larger in scope, is how do we reduce the administrative burden and provide synergy with other funds, especially if we want to implement the bottom-up approach with local entities? I think we've touched on quite a bit of those. The affordable housing plan, do you want to touch on how that will be linked with the Social Climate Fund, Ruth? Or Beatrice?
Okay. Well, okay. Okay. The affordable housing plan, for the moment, it doesn't exist yet. I mean, we are doing it. We're working. The Commission has just suddenly, started working on the issue of housing last year. It's the first time that there is a commissioner responsible for housing. So. for the beginning, and I think rightly so, he's currently starting a very wide consultation of all the stakeholders on what they think that should be done. And of course, things that could be done could be European legislation in some areas, for example, on state aid. Then it could be national legislation, and certainly there's a lot to learn because the housing crisis is not happening in all the countries in Europe. So obviously there is some countries which get it right. And thirdly, okay, there's the issue of finding a way to mobilize money to actually invest. Now, in the issue, when we're talking about housing, for some countries, the major priority is really the lack of affordable housing in cities where people want to live. But in other countries, the top priority is the very inefficient housing stock and the need to renovate this. And here comes the Social Climate Fund, is one of the possible opportunities to intervene on this aspect.
Well, thank you very much. This question on how to reduce administrative burden and provide synergy with other funds and help implement bottom-up approach with local entities is a huge question. I just want to acknowledge it, that it's a really good question, but we're not going to answer it in the 60 seconds we have left, possibly a time for another workshop at the next forum. So, a final question.
I can answer your question.
You can answer it?
Well, I can't answer it, but I can tell you that we know that we have a problem. We know that we have a problem, and that about a lot of funds working and, you know, possible overlaps, but gaps is not clear, etc. So, and that is why the Commission, in its communication that came out a couple of weeks ago, talking about the future MFF, mentions the possibility of having a single plan for all the national allocated envelopes, and then so that everything can be coordinated from the beginning. This is still thinking. I'm just repeating what is in this communication, which doesn't have much more than what I've just told you. So.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to ask one final question to each of you. It's a one-word answer. So, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low and 5 being fantastic, how successful do you think this is going to be when we stand back in 7 years' time? 1 to 5, Pedro?
Well, you're asking for my hopes or for my expectations? Well, for the hopes, that's definitely 5. For the potential, definitely 5.
Okay.
I'm going to just echo what he said. It's a fantastic answer. The hope is to be over the top, like even 10.
Okay.
But we know that is a matter of cohesion, is about multi-governance level coordination. So it's not that we don't trust the policy, the instrument itself, is just the how. And on the how, I would give probably a 3.
Okay.
Honest answer. In the
Very
middle.
diplomatic.
In the middle.
I think that it's going to be an effort of everybody, and just if I can take the consultation point, I also invite you, social actors, many of you on networks, to proactively go to the member states, because I don't want to defend them, but they are in a rush. And so I think that is good if we count on this proactivity. Clearly, 1 out of 5 is the scale, if I understand. We will work day and night for getting a 5. I will hope that we will get a 5, and I think it is very important what is at stake.
I perhaps should have asked how much hard work is it going to take on a 1 to 5. Ruth, the final word to you.
Well, actually, I'm going to say 4, because I think I'm realistic, and not. It's not just hope. I think that nothing is ever perfect, but there are elements of this fund that makes me hopeful that it can be done quickly and well. One of the reasons is that it's a very limited kind of fund. I mean, it's very clear, limited in the sense of the scope. It's very clear what it should invest in, and everyone that works on it is very committed. And yeah, I think we are identifying how to proceed. And okay, as I said, nothing is always perfect, but it can be a 4.
Well, thank you. That was very refreshing, honest answers from our panellists. We're going to wrap up now because there's lunch over in the Riverside that will continue until 2 o'clock, and then you pick your next parallel session. Please do share your thoughts using the hashtag EU Social Forum, and if you want to tag this particular session, use the hashtag Social Climate Fund. And a round of applause, please, for excellent panellists. Thank you.